I will never forget one case of a young girl. She was around 14 years old. She was with her father on a bus station, and during the attack, her father covered her with his body. The father died, so he basically took all the injury to himself. If it was not for her father, she would have been dead during that time.
Welcome to Medical Portraits. My name is Carl, I'm a physician, and in this podcast, I talk to inspiring doctors who have extraordinary stories to share. It's been more than 3 years since the Russian invasion in Ukraine began. Since then, Khassan El-Kafarna's life changed forever. He told me his incredible story, a journey marked by a decision to move to the front lines and become a war surgeon. Thank you very much, Khassan, for taking the time to talk with me. After the Russian invasion began in 2022 and the Ukrainian president was offered to be evacuated, he famously responded, "I need ammunition, not a ride." I wonder, what was your first instinct when the war broke out? Did you ever have the urge to, run away as far as possible from the front lines?
No, to be honest with you, when the war started, I was at the hospital. I was actually having a night shift. I woke up to the sounds of the explosions. That was in Kyiv, by the way, in the emergency hospital in Kyiv. That was unusual for me. I mean, for Ukraine, yeah, in Gaza, yes, that's well, it could be a usual thing, but in Ukraine, I really didn't believe it. It was like unbelievable, and my colleague actually also woke me up and told me that the war started. Well, I also saw like the panic in the hospital, etc. But the first thing that I did was checking on my brothers that were actually in Kiev. Everyone said about his opinion and what we are going to do. My decision was to stay at the hospital, and I stayed at the hospital for 2 months. I lived there for 2 months. I didn't leave the hospital.
In
Well,
Kiev.
yes, in Kiev. And well, since I'm a surgeon, it's my internship. Well, the war started. I'm definitely going to be needed in case something happens, in case we are going to be having mass casualty incidents, etc. An extra hand will definitely come in handy. So this was my decision, and I stayed there in Kiev and lived at the hospital for 2 months. I didn't have the urge to go anywhere or run anywhere. So that was my position. I made it clear for my family, for my brothers, and well, they understood me. So this was my decision, and I went for it.
And that was at a time when it wasn't clear to anyone in the world if Kiev or if the Ukrainians could fight back the army or whether actually the Russians would take Kiev. So I can only imagine that must have been a moment of like big uncertainty. The front lines did end up shift further east as the war progressed. What do you remember of the time after the 2 months in the Kiev hospital, how it unfolded? When was your decision also to change hospitals and move to a different area? Hassan is half Ukrainian, half Palestinian. He was born in Kiev but raised in Gaza and was surrounded by conflict and violence as he grew up. He later returned to Kiev for medical school, and when the war broke out in 2022, he made the bold decision to join Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, also known as Doctors Without Borders. With them, he moved to Kostiantynivka at the front lines. As the Russian forces progressed, he was later forced to evacuate, but that didn't stop him. At the time of our interview, he was working at a hospital just a few kilometers away from the front lines.
So after 2 months, well, after the liberation and also after the withdrawal of the Russian forces from the north part of Ukraine, my internship also ended in August. So I stayed working at that hospital. And by the end of my internship, I had to make a decision what to do after that. So it's either I keep working in Kiev with regular cases, or I can actually be helpful somewhere else. I saw this opportunity, and MSF was looking for a surgeon, so I applied for the job, and it was for Konstantinivka in Donetsk region. Well, they took me, and I never regret making that decision. It completely changed my life from regular time surgeon to a ward surgery. That was something, you can say, something new. So I went from being a surgeon in Kyiv to eastern part of Ukraine in Konstantinivka.
And you mentioned internship. Maybe for everyone who isn't familiar with the stage of your career, can you briefly explain how much experience you had as a surgeon at that stage?
The internship here in Ukraine lasts 3 years. So I had 3 years of experience in general surgery.
When you made the switch to the Donetsk region, what do you remember of the time there? The decision changed your life. What were the immediate effects and how did it unfold in the weeks and months after that? The war in Ukraine continues to take a devastating toll. According to the United Nations, more than 12,000 civilians have been killed and over 27,000 injured. In the east of the country, hospitals are in a state of emergency. Mass casualty events, destroyed roads, and shattered infrastructure make it difficult to treat both the wounded and the chronically ill. In the first year and a half of the war, the number of people with disabilities has risen by 300,000. Near the front lines, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, operates under extreme conditions, where even hospitals become targets. 1,600 medical facilities have already been damaged or destroyed.
It was like a decision to uncertainty. I really didn't know how it's going to end up. So when I went to Dnipro first time, they picked me up from the railway station. I went to the MSF office in Dnipro. They briefed me about the place I'm going to. They made sure that I understand where I'm going to. Also briefed me about security and how to act in case of any emergencies. And after that, well, the next day I went to Konstantinivka. And from there, everything began. My adventure, I would say, with trauma surgery. Was something totally new for me. I haven't seen something like that before. I mean, in Kyiv, usually emergency surgery, not war surgery, in that specific hospital that I was actually working at. So started working as a surgeon. We had an expat. I started assisting, and we also had multiple incidents of mass casualty influx.
Yeah.
And that was like, I would say it was a shock for me to see that amount of patients coming at once with devastating traumas and a lot of blood everywhere, people panicking. And step by step, I started adapting to the situation and started working, focusing on the work that I have. Started helping people. And since then, step by step, I started more efficient providing medical care in this kind of scenarios.
You mentioned mass casualty events. Just for comparison, I think in Germany, it is the definition of a mass casualty incident is if there's 5 or more patients arriving at your hospital at the same time. So that is kind of the official criteria. Within 6 to 7 years of hospital work, had never had the experience, fortunately, to witness a mass casualty event. What was it like to be in that situation for the first time? And what is the scale? What is the situation? How must I imagine this to take place?
The first time I saw a mass casualty, it was around 30 people from Solidar. A lot of people coming by car, by ambulance, volunteers, people on their own vehicles, a lot of blood, people crying, looking for their beloved ones, and also a lot of mess, I would say. Everywhere you see blood, consumables, well, a lot of movement. Going around the emergency department, everyone is trying to help. At a moment, my world, I would say, stopped, and it was like complete black. And only after that you start, when you have the patient and the patient is in front of you, you know that you have to help that patient. And at that moment it just clicks and you just start working with the patient and start working according to the ABCD system. But the C is, in fact, in case of hemorrhage, C comes first. So first we stop the hemorrhage, and after that we check the airway circulation, breathing circulation, etc. It's chaotic. It was our first experience, and it was actually like we just arrived to that emergency department. It just started. It was August 2022. Not everything was organized yet. I mean, the system. We all came to that emergency department and we started helping, but we managed it very well because we had experts who have experience in that. We triaged the patients, and together with the surgeons, with the emergency doctors and anesthesiologists, we decided the priorities, prioritizing patients who goes to the emergency department, who needs referrals. Our ambulance team was actually stationed in the same hospital, and they came up also to help to refer patients mostly to Dnipro. And so this is how it looked in Konstantinivka. And for Pokrovsk, and well, we gained a lot of experience in having mass casualty incidents. And as soon as it began, first thing, we activate the mass casualty plan. We started triaging patients, and according to the ABCD system, we examined patients and give medical aid to the patients that we had. And it was much more organized than it used to be on the first time.
What changed, would you say, the times after that you experienced this? Like, what did the team work together in a smoother way? What were the reasons why this worked better?
So after the mass casualty incidents, after each one, we have a briefing. We discussed what went well and what needs to be improved.
Yeah.
And we also had the experienced expert surgeon and emergency department and OT nurse, etc. They've seen this a lot of times. So for them, it's very experienced. And we started planning trainings, and we started doing training simulations. This way, we started improving and started building the team capacity in that emergency department. Thus, we managed to increase the quality and the quality of care given by us, and also increase the response time. So basically, it was sharing experience with experts, trainings, simulations, and well, experience.
And what are the kind of injuries that you were treating in events like this, but also in moments when there wasn't a mass casualty incident?
Most of the time, we had it's more than half of the patients that we saw in the emergency department were actually war wounds. Traumatic amputation of limbs, penetrating abdominal chest trauma, traumatic brain injuries, penetrating also head injuries, a lot of soft tissue wounds, shrapnel wounds. Much less we received gunshot wounds, but it was mainly shrapnel wounds from bombs and missiles that were used during the fightings. So this is mainly during when we had mass casualty incidents, and not only so. When we didn't have war wounds, we had general surgery emergencies, like, for example, appendicitis, incarcerated hernias, gangrenes, bowel obstruction, etc., all these kinds. And also, you cannot stop vehicle accidents. We also received a lot of patients with traumas from motor vehicle accidents. Unfortunately, people who are under a lot of stress, and they can also lose their minds. We've seen a lot of violent attacks, domestic violence, patients with burns, patients with stab wounds, etc.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the misconceptions when we think about being a surgeon in a war zone, of course, all the other cases that you would usually get to treat, they don't just stop. They just add up and contribute to kind of a larger number of cases. When there's a mass casualty incident, is there anything that kind of indicates that this might happen to you? Like, for instance, I know that you have an app that will pop up an air alarm, for example. So when airstrikes are happening, this alarm goes off. Is this an indicator of something that might happen to you, and you are preparing for patients, or is it difficult for you to tell? What do you do in a situation when there's an alarm? How can I imagine a situation like that in a hospital?
So how we do know about mass casualties? Mainly in Konstantinivka, it was actually sudden. So the first patient that comes to the hospital, we ask them if there are any other casualties. They tell us if there's a lot of people, there was a group of people with injuries, and also from the volunteers that bring the patient to us, they tell us
Hmm.
that you are going to be receiving more casualties, or more casualties are on the way to this
Mm.
hospital. So this is usually how it happened. But in some cases, when an explosion happens in the same city in Konstantinivka, and there is like a big explosion that you can actually hear, we start preparing ourselves despite not having, even if we don't have any injuries, we start preparing for mass casualty income.
Mm.
We do have an alert system, but in
Hmm.
that area, it almost works 24/7. It, it,
Okay.
it, yeah, so it went like on and on. It rarely actually was off. We're orienting on the patients and also
Mm.
how close the explosion is. And we
Mm.
also have our security officer and advisor who monitors the situation around us. And also in case of these kind of explosion, first we go, our safety.
Hmm.
So we go to the basement and we stay there and for 20 minutes, and after that we come up and we start,
Mm.
like, if we have like an emergency, we have everything basically ready.
So basically, the alert system, since it's ongoing, doesn't really have an effect on your daily work because you can't interrupt every time the alert goes off, as it seems to be going on the entire time.
Well, since it's ineffective, that
Mm.
doesn't mean that we have to stop doing
Mm. Yeah.
anything, to have to stop our duties. We were more relying on our security advisor
Mm.
and security
Yeah.
officers regarding that matter,
Yeah.
because, well, they were monitoring the situation, and if they see that there's like a risk, like an increased risk of shelling, we receive a message. We have like a group for personal safety, and we get an information that we should go to the shelter, and we go directly to the shelter and wait
Mm.
until we have another message saying that we can get out from the shelter.
You mentioned, 20 minutes in the shelter, roundabout. What's the atmosphere like there? Do you kind of try to just avoid conversation and get some distraction? What's going on in the shelter in those moments?
Well, I would be honest with you that at that time we don't think about anything but the patients. How
Mm.
many patients? What are we going to have? What do we need to prepare? How to prepare ourselves for the income if we have a mass casualty incident? And basically that's it. And also monitoring and looking in the news if there are something
Mm.
in the groups, in Telegram groups, if
Mm.
there are explosion happening in somewhere near. And also we can actually monitor that there might be, for example, a target on a market.
Mm.
Then we know that we are going to have a mass casualty incident. During that 20 minutes, we are mainly focusing on how to prepare ourselves and monitoring the situation.
Mm. You hear bombs going down, you hear the explosions. How far away were you from the front lines in Kostiantynivka? And is this something that you constantly hear, or are there days when you don't hear any attacks or bombs going off?
This is actually an interesting, because when we in Konstantinivka, it was, we can hear explosions on daily basis. It was very close to the front line. If at the beginning it was around 20 kilometers, 25, something like that. And before evacuating from Konstantinivka, it was 15 kilometers, around 15 kilometers. That's very close. And constantly we can hear the explosion happenings in the near village, and also the work of the artillery, well, and air defense also. So all this, it happened almost 24/7. So it was constantly explosions almost every day. Some days we had some quiet days, but most of the time it was we could hear explosions like far away, but we could hear them.
Also, hospitals have been targeted during attacks again and again since the war started. Is this something that is on your mind, or do you try to block it out? How do you deal with the situation and the fear of this happening to a place where you are?
In that case, that's why I leave all my faith and this question to our security advisor and security officer. So we have our faith and also the management of our project. I put all my faith on them, just focus on my work. This is usually, I really don't think about it that the hospital, the hospital could be targeted. And it actually, in one case, the hospital was targeted when our staff members were actually at the hospital in the same building.
Were you there as well?
No, it wasn't me. At that time, none of my team was actually at the hospital. It was the ambulance team. We were in Selidova hospital, and the hospital was attacked, and luckily none of our team members actually got hurt. So I really don't think about it and focus more on my work. This makes my life much easier, because if I'm going to be thinking about whether the hospital is going to be attacked or not, I will not be able to function well as a doctor, and this puts me and the patients at risk.
You mentioned the evacuation of the hospital in Konstantinivka. You're in a very dynamic situation. The front lines change, and at one point, I imagine somebody makes the call that the hospital needs to be evacuated. And I can imagine that evacuating from a zone like this, even by yourself, is quite an undertaking, but let alone an entire hospital. How did you manage to evacuate an entire hospital from a war zone?
For patients that can walk, it's easy. You can just tell them to pack your stuff and move. For other critical patients, we have our ambulance team. We can prepare the patients before the patients could be referred out. So we mobilized our ambulance team, like many vehicles came to the hospital and started referring these patients to another not far away hospital. This is how we actually did it together with the local administration of the hospital. So we worked in team, and this is what we did.
And I read that also there were in the area there were mobile response teams. How does the concept of a mobile response team work?
The mobile response team, well, right now it's the hospital team. It's a part of a bigger actually project. So MSF works mainly in the east and the south of Ukraine, close to the front line, and not only. So in these places, we have a team that works at the hospital and the emergency departments. Also, we have the ambulance team that takes care of referrals from hospital to another hospital. And also we have mobile clinics that concentrating on primary health care. We also have psychologists that provide mental support to people close to the front line. Also in Cherkasy, for example, it's in the central part of Ukraine, we have a rehabilitation project working with patients affected by the war. So, how does our team work? Basically, we are like a team of anesthesiologists and nurses, and also me as a surgeon. And we also had expat surgeons and emergency doctors and OT nurses also in the team. We were mobile. We come to a hospital. For example, it was Konstantinivka at first. We established an emergency department and we start providing care there. When it comes to a point that we cannot stay there for security reason, we move to another hospital, and from there to another hospital. And this is how actually the mobile response team actually works. And also at the same time, if a mass casualty happens in another hospital that we are not working at currently, but we have connection with that hospital, we can actually send a team of an anesthesiologist, a nurse, and also me as a surgeon. We can go to that hospital and start support that hospital treating patients.
I can only imagine the, amount of patients that you've seen over the past years and also like all the dramatic images. But sometimes there are these cases that stick with you. Do you have cases that you carry around with you that you're willing to share?
I have some of these cases, and I will never forget one case of a young girl. She was around 14 years old, and also I was told when she brought her, she was basically dead. Clinically, she was dead. And we started resuscitating. Well, all the team started. It was actually during an MSI. Usually, this kind of cases, we do not resuscitate because it requires a lot of blood supply. These patients need a lot of staff, consumables, time, resources, everything. You need a lot of people treating one patient. But nevertheless, we started resuscitating this patient. We couldn't gain access. We started an interosseous access. So we have basically it's like putting a needle in the bone when you don't have access to the veins. And only after that we managed to started giving fluids and vasopressors, and only after that we managed to gain a central line. She came with a big avulsed wound in the perineum, the femur, the thigh, and the lower part of the abdomen. So there was a big defect of soft tissues of the leg, shattered femur. Also, part of the perineum was completely gone. Big ones of the lower part of the abdomen, also penetrating to the abdomen. She was completely pale, and we managed to get a pulse and also managed to have a blood pressure. And we sent her directly to the OT, where the surgeons, I was not involved in that surgery, but the surgeons, the expert surgeon with the MOH doctor started working on that patient to stop the bleeding and do a damage control surgery. One interesting fact, why I also remember this case, she was with her father on a bus station, and during the attack, her father covered her with his body. But unfortunately, the father died. So he basically took all the injury to himself. Only that part that was not covered was actually affected. So if it was not for her father, she would have been dead during that time. We started resuscitating, and after the surgery, she was not stable enough to be referred out. So we kept her at the hospital, and I stayed that time at the hospital just in case something happens, maybe like bleeding starts, etc. I stayed with an expat doctor at that time until the next morning. So we kept providing all the care needed and treatment needed to keep her alive, stabilize her status, monitored her vital signs. And the next morning, we made a decision to refer these patients.
Did you hear anything after the referral about the patient?
We had conflicting news about her. We know that she arrived to Dnipro alive, and she was also sent to Lviv, that's to the west part of Ukraine. Some say that she died, others say that she lived. I hope that she lived, and I want to believe that this young girl actually lived.
In these moments of, uncertainty and trauma, what are the things that keep you going? There must be something that keeps you doing this for such a long time. Where do you get that energy and that motivation from to continue what you're doing in this unbelievably stressful environment?
From the patients themselves. By treating them in emergencies, emergency medicine. This is something that I like actually about emergency medicine, that you can actually see the results like in a short time. You can see it by your own eyes. So you treat the patient and you see the results directly, that the patient is improving, the vital signs are improving. And also, sometimes we had kids. Yeah, it was unfortunate, but also for the sake of these patients and the sake of their smiles, it's worth being there and also treating them. Some patients stayed at the hospital, and I got the opportunity to treat them until they were discharged from the hospital, and it ends up with a patient going homes and also saying thank you. So for the sake of these events, it's worth all the time spent treating these patients. I can briefly mention also another patient that actually brings hope, and I really like this case. It was like something incredible. So we had a patient, a lady around 65 years old. She had a shrapnel wound through and through. It went through her chest from the back and went out from the front. This interesting case. Why? Because when she arrived, she definitely had trouble breathing, etc. There was like a small wound, like 1 centimeter wide wound in the back of her chest, and a big, like 15 centimeters wide exit wound on the front of her chest. And you can see the lung breathing and the air bubbling with the blood, and you can see the ribs. And when we took her, we operated her with an expert surgeon. She was lucky and unlucky at the same time. When we examined the chest, we did a thoracotomy. We debrided all the dead tissue, and there was a defect of the chest wall in the ribs and the soft tissues. We had a hard time closing that, so we can close the chest cavity. And the shrapnel went few millimeters from the subclavian vessels, the artery and the vein. So she was lucky. After the operation, she was in critical status, and we thought that she is going to die. We almost lost hope. The local team, our team, we kept treating her. We treated her in the ICU. We kept her there for a long time. We kept taking care of the wound despite her critical situation. We did multiple operations. And the most amazing thing about this patient is that she was discharged. She went out from the door on her foot with a small wound on the chest, like just a line, a scar on her chest. And this was one of the most amazing cases that I ever had. Well, I also had a lot of other cases that was also like inspiring. And for the sake of these patients, I always keep my hopes up and get my all energy despite the tiredness, despite the sleeplessness and the stress and all of that. Just seeing these patients go out from the hospital is very inspiring and very motivating. And I think that this is the most amazing thing about working in such context.
Yeah, it's necessary to draw this energy out of something in your work to keep you going. And I'm wondering, a large part of your medical career under such circumstances, do you sometimes wonder where you'd be, not just in your personal life, but also in your professional life, if it hadn't come to the war? Did you always want to be, for example, a surgeon or trauma surgeon? Was this something that you now feel confirmed that this is something that you want to keep pursuing as a physician? Yeah, what are your thoughts on that? How the war affected basically the career as a physician?
Totally, it's the case about trauma surgery. I would love to keep working in trauma surgery. After working in the East, and I'm still working in the East, I fell in love with this profession and with this direction. And well, in emergency surgery in general, and it became like a passion for me. I find happiness in my work, treating these patients, war ones, knowing that I'm treating the patient so that he can continue having his own life and well, making it better. So in the future, I will continue working as a trauma surgeon, and maybe I will have the opportunity to work with MSF in other countries affected by the conflicts.
Can you tell us a little bit how or what made you want to become a physician in the first place, way back before you started going to med school? How did you end up in that field? Because it feels like it's very fitting, but I wonder what made you join this this workforce.
It depends. Actually, multiple factors affected my decision to become a physician. Just counting the fact that I grew up in Gaza is itself a big factor. Seeing all the wars that happened in Gaza, all these wounded patients, and also the culture. Doctors were very appreciated and honored. It's an honorable profession all over the world. Also, I liked helping others. So it was during my childhood that I wanted to be a physician. When I was at school, I said I will definitely be a physician. I definitely will be a surgeon. And this is what I was actually aiming at, and this is what I achieved.
So yeah, this seems to have been the plan for a longer time. You mentioned having grown up in Gaza and now being in Ukraine, you were surrounded by, two of the biggest conflicts and also complex conflicts that are going on in the world with huge military power involved and a lot of political actors in the world having stakes in those conflicts. How does this affect you when you think about what you do as a single person, as one physician? How can you gain the strength to still believe in the meaning of your work and continuing down the road with Doctors Without Borders, with MSF, in the context of these massive conflicts? What are your thoughts on what keeps you going there?
It all comes to helping people and seeing the immediate results of the treatment. Well, it's unfortunate that we are still having a lot of conflicts. I mean, the world is getting crazy. Me personally, I cannot affect like the global issues that happening, but from my side, being as a physician, working in a humanitarian organization, the best that I can do and help in this situation is focus on patients and how to provide care for them, and how to increase the quality of care provided to these patients in the emergency department, etc. So mainly the focus are on the patients. If I focus on my work, I can function well and provide what I supposed to provide to these patients.
When you're in that, work zone and with your colleagues, do you discuss the political dimensions of these conflicts? Do you follow the news, or is this something that you want to at times rather escape and just focus on your work and not to kind of be in that mind space of, all the daily news that cover these conflicts in Gaza and Ukraine.
Yes, well, the people actually talk about the war now and then. This is something usual. They do follow the news because they have to, because they know what is going around them, etc. But at the same time, people are actually got tired of the news, me included. Actually, in the beginning of the war, I was like constantly on the news, reading the news, what is happening, etc. All the updates about the news. And at some point, I realized that it doesn't make it much better for me to keep reading these news. And I think that it's the same for the medical staff. And also people actually have their own, their own issues at the house. How to feed their children, how to live, where to find a place for them to live, how to feed themselves. With everything happening, people started focusing more on work and on themselves, and they got really tired of the politics of the war, etc.
And you as a staff, do you also get psychological support that will kind of guide you through these stressful situations at the hospital and try to kind of, catch you before you fall psychologically? Is there help provided for you in that regard?
Yes, MSF actually has a team of psychologists, and also we have a staff psychologist that provide psychological care and support, and they work with us as groups. And also we said if we need help, we can turn to them for advice, etc. But the main psychological support that we get is living as a team. So we mainly live together at the base, at the hospital, wherever we live. We all usually live together under one roof, and we support each other.
If anyone listening wanted to support your work, what would be the best way to support what you do?
With the war still ongoing here in Ukraine, the best thing that any person can do to help those in need, the affected people that are close to the front line, those who lost their houses, lost their beloved ones, injured, etc., is basically by supporting humanitarian organization like MSF and other international humanitarian organization that help those people in need. There's a big need of medical supplies, equipment, support with ambulances, even the infrastructures. A lot of facilities, medical facilities, has been destroyed. They also need construction materials. Everything that takes part in improving and keeping the health system going will help and support those in need. And this is usually through supporting these humanitarian organizations.
Of course, I will link MSF also below the podcast or video, depending on where you're listening or watching. Khassan, thank you so much for giving us such a deep insight into your work and into your thoughts and mind. Thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Medical Portraits. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more inspiring stories from the world of medicine, make sure to subscribe to the podcast. See you in 2 weeks.